Hello, everyone, and welcome to News Today. Today is 5th of December, and we are going to talk about the key developments of the day. What are the things which should be getting your attention? Let's first look at the main news. First of its kind, research and development roadmap to enable net zero targets through CCUS, which is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Then food irradiation serves as safe food processing technique backed by strong scientific validation. After that, we talk about the parliamentary panel seeks full operationalization of Lokpal's inquiry and prosecution wings. Next news is about Niti Aayog. So Niti Aayog and IBM unveil a roadmap to make India a top 3 quantum economy by 2047. And then State of Digital Public Infrastructure in India 2025 report has been released. After this, we also have some quick updates, some key terms, some key developments which we'll talk about. First, we talk about Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, then Afar region. After that, military exercise Garuda Shakti, then Seahawk helicopters. After that, you have Dhruv, then new GI tagged products in Tamil Nadu. After that, one historical event, Mahad Satyagrah. Then large exposure framework limits. And the last we talk about the Karthigai Deepam festival. So we'll talk about all of these one by one. We'll start with the first news of the day. So this is carbon capture utilization storage, and there is a first of its kind detailed research which has happened, or a roadmap which has been given to achieve this. Now, all countries of the world, or the world together, is envisaging looking at a situation where there will be net zero targets. That means this is in the context of emissions. So carbon emissions will be zero. Net carbon emissions will be zero. So if you have some carbon emission, there will be some way to absorb that also. So there will be a net balance. We'll not be adding more carbon emission. And all countries have given themselves a target. India's target is 2070. So by that time, we have to reach net zero emission. And there are different kinds of technologies which have been tried for, which are being tried for that. And one specific technology is carbon capture. And there is a detailed roadmap. Something like this has come up for the first time in India. So this is significant. So this has been prepared by the Department of Science and Technology. Okay, they have prepared this roadmap, and this roadmap is talking about 3 phases. So the goal is you have to implement carbon capture, usage, and storage. What this is, we'll try and understand this. And the process is talking about the roadmap. The plan is that we have to execute this in 3 phases, and there'll be detailed research and development programs to do that. Let's try and understand what this is, what this carbon capture and utilization is. So carbon emission, I'm sure you understand it is a problem. It's a greenhouse gas. Beyond the limit, it's going to be accumulating. It's going to cause global warming. So it's problematic. So the first step here as a part of this technology is that you capture this. So you find ways through which carbon dioxide is captured. One of the most simplest ways which everybody knows is through plants. Plants use carbon dioxide, and that's utilized in photosynthesis. So that is kind of a good thing. The more plants you have, the more carbon dioxide you will have to will be captured. So they've also mentioned that you can do it indirectly through a process of biomass. Biomass is when you are using fuels, biofuels, if I talk about it, based on plant-based sources. So if plants are being used as fuel here, biomass fueled power stations, so they are in a way taking up or using the carbon dioxide. right? The more plants you're using, the more of carbon dioxide they would have taken. And then when you are burning them also, it's kind of a balanced situation. Other than that, you can have directly also direct capture of carbon dioxide also, like it's there in the air. So you can take carbon or different forms of carbon, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, that can be done. Then you transport it. Gases have to be transported in compressed form. There are two possibilities after that. So it's either usage or storage. There are many different industries, many different ways in which carbon can be used. So wherever that carbon dioxide is needed, once you've captured, you can put it into use. Or the second thing is it can be permanently stored. There are many avenues for that, like underground in unused mines, some caves, geological formations, onshore, offshore, anywhere where you have structures which are not in use, they can be sources of storage. So this is a very comprehensive idea that you capture it, you can use it, you can store it depending on whatever is the situation there, and depending on different industries, different kind of specific technologies would be needed. That's why this roadmap is significant, because it has to fit every existing structure. And they're talking about doing this in 3 phases. Now the phases, it will be very logical, it will make sense. First is whatever is the current situation, the current state of the art technology which you have for carbon capture and utilization. Those are the technologies, like whatever is available right now, you start with that and you incorporate them in existing industries. So there are existing technologies in existing industries, find a way to like do that, incorporate that. In this kind of a situations where structure is already established, the only process which could be, the only way in which it could be used is, like they've mentioned, this is a technical term, end of pipe. End of pipe simply means that from wherever the exhaust is coming out. Okay, there's an industry, it's a polluting industry, it's releasing a lot of carbon gases, carbon oxides of different kind. And where that exhaust is coming, there you incorporate some kind of a capture system or utilization system, and from that it can be put into storage, right? So that will not need some major overhaul, but end of pipe you can incorporate it. Second is the second phase. Okay, in first phase, this is how it's going to be used. Second would talk about advanced technology. So more advanced carbon capture technologies in new industrial manufacturing plants. Now, when you are setting up new plants, you have the scope of innovating the design, right? So whatever manufacturing plants are there, you can incorporate compliant designing in their design. Like you don't have to then put it as a separate system. In their design itself, this technology for carbon capture, this should be incorporated. That will happen in the next phase when you're setting up new industries. And the third is the most latest, or they've used the word emerging technologies, emerging carbon capture and utilization technologies, in which now there is a scope of doing a lot of things. The main theme here is that the whole system, the whole structure will be based on new low emission industrial manufacturing technologies. That you have to incorporate technologies or steps that in the first place, the emission is going to be low. Okay, the emission itself will be low or will be minimal with the use of advanced systems, like they have used a biophoto electro catalytic conversion system, basically something which photo and bio, this is like something similar to photosynthesis, which will incorporate the use of carbon dioxide. So this is an advanced step. Here technological advancement has to be done. Here the overall whole manufacturing process has to be rethought, and this will be the final phase of this incorporation of this technology. What will happen if we do that? Like we have to visualize what will be its benefits, how is this helping us in our big issue of climate change and bringing things down to net zero emission. So first of all, of course, reducing emissions. So there are some industries which are highly polluting or highly which have very high carbon emissions, industries like iron, steel, chemical industries. So the first thing is that you will be able to reduce emission, or we use this word decarbonize. You have to run these heavy industries, and they are contributing a lot to carbonization. So you can decarbonize them through this technology. Then producing low carbon electricity and hydrogen. There are a lot of products like hydrogen, okay, like production of hydrogen as a process, because fossil fuels are involved in that, so carbon emission is there. Or coal, like you're having thermal plants which are burning coal, so they are also contributing to carbon emission. So through these process you can modify them also. You can have dedicated low carbon electricity production, and things like hydrogen could be produced using different processes where carbon could be reduced. And of course, another goal is whatever carbon dioxide is already there, you have to remove that. That can also be done through this technology. So multiple aspects can be targeted through this one technology, and we have a dedicated research and development roadmap now to do this. We can move towards our next discussion. Food irradiation serves as a safe food processing technique backed by strong scientific validation. So, irradiation, if you understand this word, irradiation means putting radiation into something. Different kinds of radiations are there: alpha rays, beta rays, X rays. Now, these radiations, they can be given to food. Food can be in any form. It can be like directly a strawberry can be irradiated or put on radiation, or it can be pre-packaged food, or it can be bulk food. In any way, there is a possibility that we can radiate it, and that is going to be one of the safest ways in which packaging can be done. If you want to increase shelf life of a product, you don't want it to spoil, so this is a method which is considered to be most non-toxic, and there is a lot of scientific work going on this, and that's what this is about. That there is so very strong scientific validation on doing this, because this is nutritionally very, very sound. It does not change the nature of food, it kills microorganisms, and it keeps your food non-toxic. So this is something which will be done. Let's try and understand this further. So what is food irradiation? This is a physical process in which food and agriculture commodities are exposed to a controlled amount. Okay, that amount has to be, again, the whole thing has to be very scientifically done. So there has to be a controlled amount of radiant energy, and that will be put in to radiate your food. Now, the significance of doing this is that many things can be stopped. Like one example they've given it, what happens with radiation? How is it able to do that? So radiolysis, lysis means breakdown, radio means radiation. So radiolysis, because of the impact of radiation, there's going to be splitting of water. And when water molecules are there, they're a major constituent of a lot of things. So if this water is split, this kind of prevents spoiling. Food will become drier, and this will help in food preservation. So you can also have a lot of other things which will not happen, like things will not sprout, inhibition of sprouting. There is going to be delay in ripening. Ripening is one of the most common reasons why food is going to rot. Then insects and pests will not be there. Parasites, different kinds of disease causing organisms or spoiling microorganisms, all of them will not be attacking the food. Okay, so this is the overall benefit of it. We also have the description of different kinds of rays here. So you must know about them, that these are the rays which are going to be used. These are the kind of radiations. So you have gamma radiations. This is most commonly the one which is used in India. Okay, so you have this use of this under the Department of Atomic Energy, and this is created from cobalt-60. Then you have X-rays. This is more commonly used in medicine and industry. This is another form of radiation. And then you have electrons. high energy electrons can also be used. This would be useful when you need rapid processing. Now, food irradiation is already happening in India. The government is really encouraging it. There are government projects which are going on this. And whenever there is a government initiative regarding something that you should know about, so this whole process is under the Ministry of Food Processing Industries. And what they want to set up is they want to set up multi-product food irradiation units. Multi-product means that it's not just going to be for strawberries or apples or fruits, but it's going to be a system which is going to be set for multi-product food irradiation systems. And this is being done under the cold chain scheme, which is a part of Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana. PMKSY. Under this scheme, you also have provision for setting up cold chain structures, and food irradiation is a part of that. The number of applications have already been submitted for these kind of projects, and a lot of those projects they are already operational in India. So we are doing this. This article is just focusing on the fact that what are the advantages of doing this and how this is scientifically backed system of preserving and processing food. We can move further to the next article. So this is Parliamentary Panel seeks full operationalization of Lokpal's inquiry and prosecution wings. So there's an issue of the Lokpal which is currently going on. There is a parliamentary committee report which has come up, which was supposed to look into this issue. So they have brought out some discrepancies which are happening, some issues which are there in setting up of the Lokpal system in India. So we learn about that. We learn about the law which is governing this and what the parliamentary report is saying. Let's first understand this. Passage of this law was a very significant move in India, and because of the sheer fact that this is the first such kind of law which is going to hold public servants accountable. So this is the Lokpal and Lokayukt Act of 2013. The act mandates establishment of a Lokpal at the union. So union level, central level, you have the Lokpal, and Lokayukta at the state level to deal with complaints of corruption against the public functionaries. Okay. So people, if they have some grievances of corruption against public functionaries, they can go and complain to their Lokpal or Lokayukta. So this was a provision which was set. This was a law which was enacted, and for establishment of this, they had two wings which were supposed to be created. So one was the inquiry wing, second was the prosecution wing. Right? The names themselves are clear. They tell you what they are doing. So inquiry wing is for the purpose of conducting preliminary inquiry. So whatever offense is being reported to have committed, so you have to inquire into it. And if this is there, charges can be framed under the Prevention of Corruption Act of 1988. The second wing is for prosecution, for the purpose of prosecution of public servant in relation to any complaint by the Lokpal under the said act. So one group of officers will be there. There's going to be a wing of officers who will inquire into the matter, and there's going to be a second one which is going to prosecute. Now the composition of Lokpal is also very significant. This is something again which you need to know about. Let's see what's the composition of the Lokpal. So the Lokpal will have a chairman, a chairperson, and up to 8 members. And 50% of the members have to be judicial members. Okay, this is very important that you need people with judicial expertise. Now let's see what is a judicial member. This is a person who has been a judge of the Supreme Court, or has been the Chief Justice of a High Court, right? So people with the highest amount of judicial experience, they are supposed to be there. And there is also a provision that 50% of the total members must be from SC, ST, OBC, minorities, and women. So they have tried to create like an inclusive group of people who will be fairly executing and judging any grievances which are brought in front of them. The chairperson is there who has been the Chief Justice of India. So chairperson will be the Chief Justice of India who has been, or a judge of the Supreme Court. Okay, so only that person can be the the chairperson of this. And there's a fixed tenure of it, which the security of tenure is important to make sure, they are impartial. So 5 years or till the age of 70 years. This is the term for the members. Now, since this law has been in place, there are different parliamentary committees which are given different tasks. So there's one parliamentary committee to look into the progress of this. And what they found out is that these two wings, the inquiry and prosecution wings, they are not working properly. So for the inquiry wing, they say that there are no fixed officers for it. They are just using officers on deputation. That some have been temporarily appointed into it, but the permanent structure is still not in place. And for the prosecution wing also, the same thing, that there are only a small number of cases, very small number of cases, which have reached prosecution stage so far. And again, in this also, the apparatus, the structure, the appointments, they are not done properly. So the parliamentary committee has brought attention to this issue, and now they've also given some recommendations. They say that the committee reiterates that both wings must be fully constituted within 6 months. And the inquiry wing and prosecution wings should be doing their jobs normally after that. That is the recommendation. As you will keep coming across this issue in news. If you are reading your newspapers, you'll come across editorials and opinions written on this, and further developments on this also. You should track that, okay, what has happened finally in this matter. Okay, we come to the next article, which is Niti Aayog and IBM unveil roadmap to make India a top 3 quantum economy by 2047. So this is another roadmap which you now have to see. 2047 is going to be 100 years of independence. So this is where we are hoping that India is going to become a developed country. The Viksit Bharat goal is there. And one theme which is put in here is the quantum technology or quantum economy. So let's see what this roadmap, Niti Aayog and IBM. So there's a private player and there is a government entity. Both of them have come together to talk about what can be done. Let's look at what is quantum technology first. See, going through current affairs every day, along with, of course, learning about what are the new developments, it's also significant from the point that you learn what are the themes which are relevant, which you have to go back and prepare for your static part. So this is a very important concept in science. So you must go and read more about this. So this is quantum technology, a class of technology that works by using the principles of quantum mechanics, the physics of subatomic particles. See, matter, particles, atoms, they have a certain kind of behavior which was being understood for many years through what you call classical physics. But what was observed by scientists is that when you go within the atoms, subatomic particles, okay, the behavior, the pattern, the laws, they actually change. And they were not explained by the laws of classical physics. So because of that, this whole new stream of science was created, which is quantum mechanics. Okay, and the significance of this is that it can have applications in a lot of different areas. There are 4 main areas, 4 major vectors they've used. Basically, it means 4 major applications. One is in quantum computing, then quantum communication, quantum sensing and meteorology, quantum materials. Okay, what is special about them is, like, I'll give you one example. These quantum computers. Quantum computers are going to be exceptionally fast. They are going to be many times faster than the fastest computer which we have today, or the fastest supercomputer. Like what a supercomputer will probably do in, let's say, a few months, this can do within minutes or even less than that, right? There is a very wide gap. That's the reason why we are talking about developing this. India is working on all of these. Quantum communication is going to be one of the most secure ways in which communication can be done. It is not going to be broken or leaked, or there won't be any gaps in this system. So India is working on all of this. And if you look at the status of this technology's development in India, so this is what the data is suggesting. So there is a talent pool. This you'll find very interesting. India ranks second globally in the number of graduates in quantum relevant fields, which is only behind EU. So we already have a lot of people who are skilled in this. Any new technology which is there, the big issue is you need highly skilled manpower. Then different states are coming up with their own initiatives. Like they've given you two examples here. Karnataka has established the Quantum Research Park, and Andhra Pradesh has launched Amravati Quantum Valley. Okay, so that they are first to the developments of the quantum technology or the quantum pool. Now, what this roadmap is about, what are its recommendations, how things should be done, what all should be done, let's understand that. So its aim is, the aim or the target with which it is bringing us this roadmap is to incubate 10 globally competitive quantum startups, to create a scenario where you have 10 globally competitive startups which should be making 100 million US dollars and should be capturing 50% of the value in global quantum software and services by 2035. Okay, so in the next 10 years, this is what we want to achieve in quantum technology, or this is at least the goal. This is the roadmap for the success of the quantum technology. Now, how you do that? There are some set of steps which have to be done. First is, of course, workforce needs to be expanded. Then you have to prioritize top 2-3 or top 3 to 5 quantum opportunity areas. This is very significant, that you should know that, okay, which are the areas, because quantum can be applied in different areas, right? So you have to take 2-3 or 3 to 5 top areas where you would like to concentrate your work, because then you will have professionals in that area. You can develop clusters around that. So that will help it accelerate better. Then accelerate lab to market transition. This is a problem with a lot of technologies. Sometimes the technology stays with the lab and cannot be commercialized. Like it's there in theory, and quantum has that issue because it's working with subatomic particles. So translating it into real life benefits might take time. So this is what they're talking about. This gap has to be bridged. Then lead in global standard setting. Now, this is also important, right? You are not talking about building something for India, just you're talking about global standards or competing with the global's best things happening globally, and make Indian domicile attractive to startups. This is one thing which is important. What happens is a lot of startups or tech companies which get set up or try to work also, there are so many roadblocks here sometimes that they choose to move to another place. They choose to, maybe go somewhere where tax conditions are benefit or whatever issue they are facing. So this Indian domicile or being in India should be something which should be attractive to them, and this is an inbuilt part of this roadmap. Now, the last idea here that's also linked to a technology aspect. So this is State of Digital Public Infrastructure, or as it's called DPI, in India 2025 report release. So we are going to understand what is digital public infrastructure, and then we'll talk about this report. So digital, I'm sure you understand what is digital. Public infrastructure, what it can be. See, an infrastructure based approach using technology to achieve societal goals, such as through ecosystem comprising technology, markets, and governance. So basically, this is about digitally having things or creating infrastructure, creating systems which will help in overall goal of the society or development of the country. Now, what are the conditions for operating a DPI? First is reach and scale. See, there should be, you set up systems which will be available for third parties to use, and this is important because this will then lead to they producing final products or scaling themselves. In digital public infrastructure, you don't have to create everything. You don't have to create end. Like the government will be creating public infrastructure, but the government does not need to create all the products. It is like you create something basic, you make it available to all the parties, and then they can create further products or services based on it, right? So they will be able to reach and scale. And this can only happen if there is a principle of non-exclusivity. There shouldn't be a limitation that, okay, this can be used by such groups or such groups should not be used. The design as such, it should be like that it should be inclusive by design. If you can do that, then it is what will qualify as digital public infrastructure. I'll give you examples which will help you visualize this whole thing. Just see this. What is the digital public infrastructure or India stack which is there, and what all things it has? So there is a flow of data. Different account aggregators will have it. Then you can have flow of money through UPI, right? Then flow of people through Aadhaar, right? So see, Aadhaar, let's say Aadhaar is the system which the government set up. And based on Aadhaar, so much is being created. If the data for Aadhaar, it kind of becomes a unique identity of people. So based on that, other things can build. Now, UPI is there. Again, government initiative which got integrated through bank accounts, through Aadhaar, through Jandhan accounts, Digital India. A lot of things got integrated into it, and then different avenues kept on working on that, kept on growing on that. So it was like a building block chain kind of thing. Characteristics. So this is going to be secure, consent based, then interoperable, different ways it can operate, which makes it fast, low cost. Then it's unique ID. You can have biometrics, OTP based, manual, depending on what you are trying to do, right? For each of these specific cases. Then its benefits would be financial inclusion is one very important aspect which has played out well through these different things through digital public infrastructure. So you have access to credit, financial management, there's ease of use. Like if you talk about UPI and Aadhaar integration, you have QR codes through which the system can work, ease of account opening, a lot of these things are happening digitally. With these Aadhaar verifications that you put in your Aadhaar number, there will be an OTP or KYC will happen. So all of those things are advantages of this system. Now the report. Okay, we'll talk about the report. See, the recent report which has come up, which is discussing the state of digital public infrastructure, what it is talking about is that India's digital public infrastructure is a middle path. So you have the public entity, you have private players, they're working together. And the best thing about this system is that this can be copied in or this can be replicated in other places, especially the global south. The southern part of the world, which is as of now the lesser developed part, so they can incorporate these ideas or this system of having a public private partnership. What can be done here? First is co-creation model. The government doesn't need to create everything. You can simultaneously create that. Like the example which they've given here is that the Aadhaar partners with different kinds of enrollment agencies, biometric devices manufacturers. So they don't have to do everything. They're okay, government will set up Aadhaar system, government will make biometric systems, scanners, everything. No. They can have co-creation, parallel work can be done. Then building blocks approach. So You have digital public infrastructure that can be along with different kinds of digital public goods can offer speed and scale of services. Like one example is DigiYatra. I'm sure a lot of you have used DigiYatra. So if you have DigiYatra, it has all your ID details and you can get like a streamlined and an easier flow through the airport because of that. Then expansion into diverse areas. This is also one thing which is very significant for India's digital public infrastructure. That is not just limited to one area. Okay, yes, financial aspect is very strong, but it has incorporated other key segments also. So you have agriculture, education, logistics, and all of that. This is being used. This is being applied. So that makes it holistic, and this is a requirement for all those developing nations of the global south. So this is a model which they can learn from and apply. After this, we have our quick updates to go through some key terms which you should be familiar with. The reason why they are in news, we'll talk about that also, but it's the main idea which you need to keep in mind. So we're talking here about Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It's the world's largest regional security organization. There are 57 members from North America, Europe, and Asia. India, however, is not a member. Okay, so its purpose is that it covers stability, peace, and democracy for different people, and it has different kinds of, dialogues and sessions and conferences through which it is done. And why it's been in news is because in this, Ukraine has been talking about how they want real peace with Russia because after that prolonged struggle or conflict which is going on that. So in that reference, this has been in news. Then you have this Afar region. So in Africa, in Ethiopia, you have this region, which you can see here marked with red. This Afar region is a region which scientists have chosen for analyzing plate tectonic theory. So there's this concept that the land area of the earth, sorry, not just the land area, the earth as such is made in different plates. So it's not like one continuous mass, but there are small plates, and those plates are also having some movement. So one region through which this theory will be tested or studied is in Ethiopia. That's why it's in news. Then you have military exercise. So there are so many military exercises which keep going on. Please make a list, name of the exercise, which countries are participating in it. So this is India and Indonesia. So it's currently happening in Himachal Pradesh. The name was Garud Shakti. Then you have a defense helicopter, Seahawk helicopter. You're getting a deal on this from USA. There is a land-based helicopter called Black Hawk. There is a maritime, Seahawk is a maritime variant of that, okay, which will operate over sea. So this is a part of the 24 aircraft foreign military scale contract signed with US. So US government is bringing this in, 24 such helicopters are coming in, and the significance of this would be you are increasing your maritime capabilities, you are making your maritime defense system stronger. Then you have Dhruv. This has been in news for quite some time. It's a very interesting idea. So the Department of Post, what they have talked about is that they are going to make something called Dhruv, which is going to be a digital address. So address as a service, this is what they're trying to create. So what will be a digital address? Now I'll take the example of UPI to make you understand this. So UPI is like a scanning code, right? And that is going to have all your bank information, where your bank is, your IFSC code, all of that, right? So if I have to ask somebody to deposit money into my account, I don't have to give them all my bank details. I can give them my UPI ID and the money will come. So same this way, what the postal system is talking about, instead of giving the person the whole address, they'll have something like that, some unique identity, some unique thing where you don't have to give your address, but the whole thing will automatically be reflected. So they want standardization of address, which they are going to do through this Dhruv scheme. Then large exposure framework limit. Now, what is this? This is a prudential regulation aimed at curbing concentration risk by limiting how much any single borrower or group related to borrowers can borrow from one bank. So basically, in the most simplified words, how much money or how much of credit can one group or one company or people related to a group can have from a particular bank, that is going to be decided. It's going to be decided on the basis of the size of the bank. What is the capital which the bank has, and there's going to be a limit on that. This is what the RBI is talking about. Okay. That there's going to be a large exposure framework limit. They're specifically talking about this in the context of foreign banks. Okay. Then you have the Mahad Satyagrah, a very significant, you can say, civil rights movement which happened in India. So this is 1927 in Mahad in Maharashtra, and the person who's leading this is Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So what they've done is there was this issue of restriction of certain people of certain castes, basically the lower caste, to use common public facilities like a well. So they couldn't go and drink water from the common well or the well which was belonging to people of higher caste. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, along with some of his supporters, what they did was they went and they drank water. So he belonged to a lower caste. So all the people of that kind of community, they came together to have this particular satyagrah in 1927, just demanding that water or public goods are something which should be equally accessible to everyone. Otherwise, this is just a very unfair practice. So this is the Mahad Satyagrah. Then you have new GI tagged products. So from time and again, there is a Geographical Indication Act in India. So based on that, the government keeps issuing GI tags. So what this is, these are used on products with specific geographical origin and possessing qualities due to their origin. So things which are unique to an area, right? Like Kolhapur has a chappal, Tirupati has a laddu. So this area and product, they kind of become like a unique thing, a unique tag, right? Which when they are issued, they tell you about some important or unique products of that particular area, and then nobody else would be able to use that. So only the people of that region will be able to use that unique term, right? So Tamil Nadu has been given a few of them for their cotton, for a jaggery product, for a soapstone. So like this, different types of products can be given this tag. The last quick update is the Karthigai Deepam festival. So it's a 3-day festival in the month of Kartike, which is like right now going on November, December, in the honor of Lord Kartikeya or Lord Murugan. And Deepam should tell you what it is about. Basically, it's about lighting a lot of diyas, right? So I hope this discussion was able to help you out. Please go and read the news today. You'll be able to get more aspects, more details on things. And if you've heard what we've talked about, you'll be able to understand that properly, right? After you've done that, go solve the questions. The MCQs are there waiting for you to test yourself. And beyond that, if you want to go further into any topic, you want to know about any of these developments, please visit the Digital Current Affairs page. This will give you details on different topics, and there are many other features which you can go and explore there. That's it for today. Thank you.